Good. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming to another ISSessions meeting. So as always, we're going to start with the announcements. So any January 1st years in the room right now? No? Oh my god, I already lost them. Well, welcome to the ghosts of the January 1st years in the room. I guess go around classes. Moving on, yes. So yeah, announcement number one. I talked about this 2 weeks ago, but our workshop day number one, we've begun selling tickets, and we've posted about it in Discord. So in the beginner track, there's Crypto Behind Cryptocurrency by Kiefer Weisman, who's a third year. He's a classmate of mine. And then on the advanced track, we have Building Command and Control Servers by Lee Kagan. And if you don't know Lee Kagan, he's like the C3X organizer, which is a big event that Sheridan and a whole bunch of other schools participate in every year. He's also the leader of DerbyCon Toronto, and he's like a professional red teamer as well.
We had to push the soldering workshop because our supplies haven't shown up yet. Yes. That's why it kind of got moved.
Exactly. So the soldering workshop is going to be on workshop day number 2, which is probably going to be like early April. And there's also an Arduino workshop as well, which will require some soldering. So what we'll probably do is we'll have like a nice, like a hardware day kind of thing. So you'll do like some soldering to make a badge, and then in the second workshop, you'll probably do like you're gonna make like a rubber ducky kind of thing from scratch using Arduinos. And you can, you're gonna have to pay us like a small fee for both workshops, and then we'll probably do like a bundle deal if you want to do both in the same day as well. Okay. Just for Lee's workshop as well, just to highlight this like very strongly, you really have to do the setup because Lee doesn't want to spend any time doing any setup with you on that day. We've booked 2 hours the Friday night before for you to do the setup. That's going to be from 7 to 9. I'm going to be in the room. I'll have gone through everything to answer questions, and then Lee's going to be up on the screen, and he's going to be walking you through it step by step. Okay? So there's a bunch of like AWS cloud stuff that you've probably never been exposed to, and we're booking off that 2-hour session just for you, just to go through it and make sure that everybody's ready. Okay? Yeah.
So there's setup steps already posted online. Do you recommend we go through it ourselves, or just wait till that 2-hour block?
Honestly, it's all like GUI, and it looks really simple. I would go through it.
Is that for AWS though?
Yeah.
Careful.
Careful? Okay.
Because if you accidentally crank something and you leave it running, you can burn through your free credit faster than you think. So maybe if you're not comfortable with AWS, wait until the setup night. Okay. Just a word of warning. As someone who's done that to himself in the past.
So yeah, if you're not comfortable, wait until 7 to 9. We're going to go through everything, and I'll be answering questions, and Lee will be on the screen. Okay, awesome. So, and then the second announcement is just our regular announcement. You should do a talk. I'm still looking for two project end speakers. So if you want to do kind of like a presentation about a project, it doesn't have to be like something crazy, just something that you've been working on or something that you've been practicing, and you just want to talk about it in front of everybody here. It's a pretty comfortable environment. Please do. It'd be awesome. That's it for announcements, and on to the news roundup with Nick and Al.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're doing news a little bit differently this week. We've reduced the number of stories so that we can take about a minute-ish per story to give ourselves a little more time than usual. And there are still other stories, though, that I felt were newsworthy. So if you go to the Pastebin link, underneath the main stories, you'll see there's like other newsworthy items. So you can read those at your leisure. They're still important. It's just, yeah. Anyways. Adam.
Okay. Yes, so basically Citrix, there's a vulnerability in Citrix where there's an unauthenticated code execution. So basically remote adversaries can, it's a vulnerability in Citrix application delivery encoder and Citrix gateway. It has been known since December 2019, and I believe it's still being they're still working on a patch for this. So yeah. So for enterprise customers, it's a bit of an issue.
Yeah.
Now.
Kind of a big deal. Lots of companies use Citrix for like remote connectivity, like kind of a huge deal. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's
and
a
I believe
thing.
Citrix is more for like running legacy applications like remotely or so, or running remote applications or so.
You can do that too. I happen to know that a lot of organizations also just enable like remote access into controlled environments for Citrix. Yeah, totally. This one's an interesting piece from the New York Times, however, behind a paywall. It's about basically a facial recognition company that's starting to work a lot with law enforcement in North America. If you want a little more info, you can at least get the first sentence if you go to like a private incognito tab, or you can go to this other version of the article on ABC, where they talk about Clearview AI, which is the name of the company. Which, funny, was that like it was under a different name before, and they just used to make like app games and stuff. And then they were like, oh, we're going to get into facial recognition and start selling all this data to police agencies to start doing facial recognition on people. That's terrifying, but hey, this is the future that we live in.
Do they currently sell it? Do they currently sell their technology, or
to law enforcement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So just, I don't know, think about that kind of stuff. Always remember.
Yes. So what turned out to be like more of a marketing idea turned out to kind of cause some security concerns, security and privacy concerns. So this impacts BlackVlue dash cam, BlackVlue dash cams for your car. So the feature is it was meant to allow users to broadcast their camera feeds wirelessly. So as you're driving, like you can broadcast like what the camera sees, and then like owners can check the status of their car when they get when they get an alert through the app, or share feeds with users through the app as well. And it also allows like users to easily upload like car accidents and mishaps on social media. So it's kind of like they wanted to do something similar like Ring did with their Ring doorbells, or like you see on social media like people's houses and like delivery drivers doing stuff. And so someone that did reverse engineering took a look at the app, did some reversing of it, and they wrote some scripts to scrape data off of it. And so they found that they can not only pull current data, but also historic data going back months. So yeah, kind of a concern. The company says that our developers have updated the security measures following your report from yesterday that I forwarded. So, or not me, this is a quote from the article. And so, yeah, so they're going to reevaluate it, and they're taking some security measures. So currently, some of the code that a researcher wrote doesn't work, so they seem to be kind of addressing it, which is good. So, yeah.
Addressing an ongoing issue with SMS fraud and swapping. So the security industry has been a little bit torn recently on whether or not using text messages for second factor or multi-factor authentication is a good idea or a bad idea. Mostly because of this problem where people will call your telco and social engineer them into getting the SIM card switched over to one that the attacker controls, and then they can get all your text messages that will include like second factor authentication so that they can log into your stuff. I'm of the opinion that it's still more secure than not having any second factor at all, because it prevents brute force. The person's got to go that extra step of social engineering you. However, it's still a problem because this is very possible and there's lots of proofs of concept out there. What's interesting, though, is that a bunch of senators in the United States have started sort of pushing the telcos to be more proactive about this. They're actually asking the Federal Communications Commission, which is like the U.S. equivalent of the, RTC or CRTC in Canada, to basically start being more active and clamping down on a lot of this social engineering and SIM swapping a little bit more, implying that there might be more penalties and things like that, which is going to be great. We'd like to be able to, be assured of the security of our SIM cards, and so that people can't hijack them and get all my illicit text messages. Not that I get any, but whatever.
Especially since people we know that passwords aren't secure. Password hygiene is not, it's not great. So relying on second factors, that was good. So this is just kind of a fun story. So there was an email sent to students of the Southampton University, allegedly. So like they sent it as the vice chancellor, so claimed the university, like due to Brexit, was going to be closed for exams. But like, so if you look, they kind of highlighted a few things. So in the fish, so if you guys did any fishing training, you'd notice that, for example, one of the universities was spelt wrong. And also they were close, but not quite. They signed off with the chancellor that with the wrong chancellor. So it wasn't up to date. So yeah, so small details that gave clues, but yeah, it caused a mishap. So yeah,
Solid try though. I mean, that's pretty good. Now
Yeah,
you all
exactly.
have an idea for like midterms.
yeah, it's like one day.
Yeah. Under the category of like make work projects. So we heard about this story a long time ago, but now the person has sort of pled guilty. The idea was this person started up a security company that did DDoS mitigation, meaning if your company was being subject to a massive denial of service attack, they would kind of take care of rerouting all that traffic and sinkholing it and basically taking care of the DDoS for you. The problem was the person that founded BackConnect Security LLC was also paying botnet operators to target people with DDoSes so that he could then approach them and start selling the service. We've heard about other similar shady activities in the InfoSec industry before too, like people basically hacking into companies and then targeting them and saying, hey, do you want to like use our pen test service? Because we've heard that you're vulnerable to things, right? Obviously, that's all kinds of illegal. You're, violating all the regular cybercrime laws, probably some kind of fraud laws too involved in that. Anyways, this person pled guilty and so is probably going to go to jail and get a bunch of fines and stuff like that. So I always like the few stories where we actually do end up catching the bad guy. That's always nice.
Yeah, so basically there was an ODay that was discovered in Microsoft's IE, so Internet Explorer. It affects versions 9 to sort of 11. I'll get to that as well. So basically there was a library called JScript DDL, which was the scripting engine that handles objects in memory in the browser. And basically it allowed an attacker to corrupt memory and allow for arbitrary code execution as the current user context. So the reason why this is dangerous is because a lot of people run their accounts as admin. So if, for example, you're running the web browser as an admin user, you're running as admin privileges, and so that's how they were able to compromise the machine easily. And so this affects mainly Windows 7 because in Windows 10, Microsoft changed the DDL to JScript 9 DDL. So it mainly affects Windows 7, but depends on how your IT environment is set up, their libraries. And it doesn't seem to be widespread. Researchers discovered this in the wild being exploited, but this was mainly used to target specific individuals, not mass compromising. And so it was... it's suspected that an Asian ATP called Dark Hotel was behind this.
Great name for an APT group, by the way.
Yeah, isn't it? And yeah, that's about it. So.
Something's interesting. So we've talked a couple of times in recent sessions about some of the concerns around centralized data services like Nest and things like that. I guess a group of scammers found a new way to use some of this data and some kind of open cameras that are out there. They're basically, they've developed NIST footage into like a sextortion scam where they will email people saying, hey, we have video of you being naked and stuff like that. But as proof, they'll just send them like pre-connected clips of like Nest cams of people's offices and stuff like that. But I guess, if you saw cam footage of an office or of people's front door, you might think, wow, they really have the ability to do all this kind of stuff. That's scary. Maybe they have video of me from somewhere.
Wasn't that similar to how, like, the LinkedIn, the emails being sent that we've compromised all your accounts and your password, and they just sent their LinkedIn password.
Yeah. A while back, there was a similar type of fraud that wasn't using like embedded video, but the scammers were sending like old passwords for that user that were part of previous data breaches, saying, hey, look, we obviously have one of your older passwords, so we must have all your new stuff. Anyways, just sort of an ongoing trend of bad guys, including more data, trying to convince people to give them money before they release, whatever footage they may have found of their victims. Unfortunately, they're usually pretty successful with stuff like this.
Yep. So Windows 7, so the German government has to pay around, so Windows 7 is dropping mainstream support and is going to extended support. So the German government is going to be paying around almost 900,000 in licensing. So basically they failed to upgrade about 33,000 machines to Windows 10. So they're still in the process, but like one of the managers that they said, one office, they have 20,000 machines left to upgrade out of 85,000. So like that's still like a lot. And this is kind of typical. We see like for Windows XP, and because that became popular, Microsoft offered extended support for enterprise customers. So they listed out pricing for like large enterprises. So it's quite steep. So for the first year, like $25. And then it only doubles every year, and that's for large enterprises. For smaller businesses, like they're going to be charging like twice that amount, so $50 for this year, and then keep upping it. So yeah, kind of encouraging people to move on. And then related to this, so for all of us, the rest of us that are running Windows 7. Microsoft released last week. They released this splash screen notifying users that Windows 7 is out of date and they should really upgrade to Windows 10, please. And yeah, so that's an article that kind of speaks to that.
I like that they use
like your parents like ask.
The same graphic for both of those articles. That's some solid reuse
yes.
by The Verge on that one.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nice. So. Cool. This one's interesting. I love when we get actual hard numbers on stuff like this, because oftentimes a lot of people don't want to say how much was paid out in ransomware. So a couple of surveys found that the fines, basically, or the fees people paid for decrypting ransomware have tripled recently, which is interesting. And they got hard numbers, like in Q4 of 2019 over Q3, they saw an increase from 41,000 to 84,000, and in some instances, like almost $1 million, $750,000 for some enterprises. What that says to me, and I could be wrong, what that says to me is that the ransomware authors or the people running the campaign are getting more effective at knowing who they have infected. In the past, it was always kind of a gamble. They didn't know whose machine their malware had landed on, so they would just sort of ask for money, and it was however much the person could afford. There's old stories about people calling like ransomware tech support saying, you're asking for $1,000, dude, I don't have $1,000. I'll give you $200 because it's just my family photos. And you could like bargain them down like that. But I guess maybe now they're getting a little more insight into when they land on an enterprise versus on an individual's computer, so they can up the amount. I'm not basing that on any actual data. I'm just kind of assuming, because otherwise why are they raising the rates unless they know they can get more money? And obviously this also suggests people are still paying ransoms. If you got to keep your business running, I get why you're going to do it, but man, we need to like clamp down on this problem because it's costing a lot of people a lot of money.
Yeah, and they're just upgrading like the way they did it. Like initially when ransomware was hitting, like they wouldn't verify whether you actually paid. So if you just send an email saying, yeah, I paid, they would just send you the decryption key. So like they're maturing.
Yeah. Oops, I got two in a row. No so a while ago, ThreatPost ran a survey when there was a whole bunch of drama going on in the information security industry around, are proof of concepts for exploits actually bad or good? So the idea is when a researcher finds a new vulnerability in a piece of code, oftentimes they will release a short snippet or a proof of concept around how someone would exploit that vulnerability. Some people say, well, that's not great because you're leading to bad guys being able to weaponize this faster and start targeting organizations. Other people say, no, we need to see how the exploit works so we can develop signatures, so we can develop appropriate patches. So there's a lot of back and forth. You know, you can go into maybe their survey methodology if you want, but the ThreatPost one came back, can't zoom in. But the green is the people saying generally it's okay that this is happening. It's probably doing more good than harm. And these are the people voting for it's doing more harm than good. And generally, you think the people reading threat posts and taking their polls are people in the security industry, so you kind of come around with that piece of info. So, interesting. It's nice to know because obviously again, you can have your own opinions. I'm on the side of releasing the exploits helps with patching and with signature detection. That's just my take on that.
Yep. Okay, so this article, so the EU is considering a 5-year ban on running facial recognition software on people in public spaces.
Yes.
Different technology companies have expressed different opinions in regards to this. So Google, actually, which was surprising to me, it supports the ban, saying that this allows people to take the time to understand the technology, like to prevent like AI bias, which is a big challenge in identifying and does exist in AI. Microsoft doesn't agree with the ban. They say that it stifles innovation. And so they're kind of deciding. It's still up in the air.
It's interesting. I like when we get into situations where sometimes the technology moves faster than our laws do. Actually, all the time, technology moves faster than our laws, and our laws are trying to catch up. But it's nice to hear some of the organizations looking at the impact and going, yeah, we have this stuff. Maybe we should slow down a little bit, which leads nicely into our next article. A bunch of academics in the UK are saying, wow, our Computer Fraud Act from a long time ago needs updating. That's 30 years old at this point. A lot of the terminology is outdated. A lot of the language, the punishments, and just our understanding of the industry has changed drastically since then. So they're saying, this really needs to be updated to reflect the modern technology environment. Again, because the tech and the development of the industry moves so much faster than the legal system can keep up with it. Normally the way we see things evolve is going to be the tech happens first, and then social norms and some policies kind of follow slowly after that, and eventually our legal frameworks catch up. It tends to be those three things in that order that keep pace with technology. So it's interesting to see these people calling for reform of those laws.
Okay, so Jeff Bezos' phone got hacked about a year ago, and so he hired a consulting company called FTI Consulting to investigate the issue, and they kind of what they suspect is that the Saudi crown prince Mohammed bin Salman sent a video using WhatsApp to Jeff Bezos. That's what they're saying, that it's relatively high confidence that this was that video was what compromised the device, and so during that year. There's been a bunch of stories about leaked information in regards to Jeff Bezos' personal life.
This one's interesting too because I saw there was a long Twitter thread by Robert Graham or Arreta Rob, and he went through the report that had been sort of opened up about some of the forensic analysis on the phone. And he was dissecting some of it and claiming some of it sounds a bit fishy or sketch, or that he doesn't necessarily believe some of the findings in the report. He's probably going to post it on his website. It's probably worth having a dig for that, just to see the critique of someone's forensic analysis, which is often a tricky thing to do in our industry, but sometimes it happens.
And also they mentioned that the UN is kind of investigating and seeing, so it's still an ongoing issue. They haven't attributed directly to him, but the report is relatively confident in it. So.
Interesting. Yep. And last story, someone set up a honeypot to mimic factory environments, basically what we call ICS or SCADA environments, or industrial control systems, or supervisory access and data something, to find out what kinds of stuff is targeting factories and industrial environments. So the article talks about the kinds of things that got thrown against this honeypot. They also talk about the development of the honeypot. That itself being, you set up a fake environment to kind of see what bad guys are doing. They found that there was lots of ransomware being thrown at the industrial control systems, along with typical botnet software, and then a few more detailed kind of targeted exploits and attacks. But they said a lot of it was ransomware, which is interesting. It's concerning because we don't like when people target industrial control systems, because that could mean like, yeah, factories, but it could also mean like public utilities like power and water and things like that. We want to make sure that obviously those systems are hardened as much as they can be and not going down because of some ransomware. Right? Yeah, so that's it for the news.
Yep, right on time too.
Oh, damn.
Look at that. Okay, and so now up next is Luai's feature story.
Really funny on that Amazon story. I think the title of the story was "Who honestly had the Saudi Crown Prince in their threat model?" Which is just like, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so this is our feature story. For those of you who have never done the feature story before, it's just like a chance for sort of to bring everyone into conversation, have a discussion. I have no opinion in these things. It's up to you to have the opinion and to sort of discuss with each other. I'm just facilitating the conversation, asking the questions, and maybe helping you think of more things along the way. Our feature story is actually, Nick's already talked about it a little bit, so it's the POC exploits, and do they actually do more good than bad? So let's get started. So that threat post article that you saw, it found that 60% of security experts support the release of POC exploits for zero-day vulnerabilities. And the interesting thing about this is that, well, that's like 60%, 40%. You also broke the slides.
That should come back.
Oh, okay, cool. So just to get started, just because we do have some first years in the room, just to kind of get the terminology out of the way. Just for those in upper years, who can tell us what a proof of concept or a POC is? And if you don't participate, I just stand here and look like an idiot, so please help me. Thank you.
A proof of concept basically proves that the exploit exists and that it can be exploited.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so it's demonstrating exploitability of a given vulnerability. Okay, and what is a zero-day vulnerability? So if the third years don't know this and the fourth years don't know this, it means there's something fundamentally wrong, and Nick has to change it.
Also, some of the alumni in the audience, I'm taking your degree back if you don't. No,
yeah.
My cold and hard hands.
All right. Our speaker.
Yeah, it is. I am a speaker? Oh, yeah, I am. A zero-day vulnerability is a vulnerability that has not been publicly disclosed to the public, so that means nobody knows how to protect against it. There's no possible mitigation against it. Likely not even the developer knows about it, unless it's been like publicly privately disclosed. So it's a vulnerability that nobody knows about. So essentially, if you discover it and you kind of use it to your own benefit, that's why it's called a zero-day vulnerability, because someone's actually using it, and there's no way can't recognize it because it's not been publicly disseminated to the public.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no patch available, and it's called a zero-day because yes, is it legal? Is it illegal? Why would you think that? Sorry, I can't hear. Since they're usually under? Oh, I see. Okay, interesting. So they're usually under non-disclosure agreements. Yeah.
But if you're just like a random person who took this and reverse engineered it, then you're not under an NDA. So
I see.
Would it be legal?
Okay, so far we have, if it's under an NDA, it is illegal, but if it's not under an NDA, then it is legal. Is that fair to say? Okay.
Well, it would depend on the terms and conditions of the software manufacturer.
Okay. When you say terms and conditions, like what do you mean?
Of use, like some terms and conditions say you can't reverse engineer this piece of software, or.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So that's actually a really good point. Yeah. So actually, and that's true. And I believe Nick was talking to me about this earlier today, where like if you there are actually some bans around reverse engineering a software. So if you do reverse engineer it and you don't have the rights to, then you could actually be sued and you could be found guilty. Nick, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. Typically when you get busted for reverse engineering, it's because you're either violating the terms and conditions on the software. That doesn't land you in jail. That just gets you sued. The only other legal framework that I'm aware of that in any way prohibits reversing is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. It says that reversing is illegal if you're doing it for the purpose of circumventing copy protection. So if you're making like a proof of concept on cracking a video game or making
Right. So I mean, can you think of why reversing, not necessarily to develop like a POC, why would reversing be a good thing? Why do we need to reverse engineer software? Sorry. To use it for free? Yeah. Okay. That's one of them. Yeah. And it's probably an illegal one. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Maybe take it a step further or expand its capabilities, like maybe like virtualization back in the day. Maybe did some reversing to understand some stuff. Or
Yeah. No, that's actually a good point, and I will come back to that. And sorry, you had a point as well.
It could be malicious. You don't know.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, we reverse engineer software, which is malicious all the time in the security industry. Jim, do you have a?
Maybe it's kind of obvious, but maybe just to find vulnerabilities, right? Reverse it just to see if there's any ways to protect people. And
Yeah, those are all good points. Coming back to that, to the point about like expanding things. So yeah, a lot of the time, actually, one vendor has to reverse engineer the software of another party or of like another company because they want to make sure that their two softwares are interoperable. Because sometimes one of them might not actually release like really good documentation describing that piece of software. Okay. So yeah, and extending it as well. As it turns out, it's actually not illegal at all to release a proof of concept. Okay, actually, let me ask you. Like, actually, I have no idea what the answer to this question is. Like, why do you think that is?
why do we think it's not illegal?
Yeah, like why can anyone just release a working proof of concept for a vulnerability, and there's always that risk that somebody's going to take that and weaponize it?
In the States, it doesn't get free speech property.
Yeah, actually, that's one really, really good reason, right? The First Amendment says everybody has the right to free speech, and if a researcher wants to release their research and wants to talk about it, then it's totally their prerogative to do so, right? And maybe we shouldn't be constraining that. Before I move on, does anyone want to add anything?
So you might get sued by a company for concept?
So as Nick said, you can get sued, yes. However, there's really there's not a lot of legal precedent for you to get convicted unless, again, it was for reverse engineering. And Nick, correct me if I'm wrong.
Or depending on how good the software vendors, lawyers are at trying to enforce their terms and conditions. Because there you're violating like civil law, not like criminal law.
Yeah, sorry.
Also, even though it's illegal, there's also like socially acceptable. So I think there was a situation where someone released like a POC for a vulnerability, and then they posted on their like repo or so, and then like people came back and were like, you should have like disclosed this to Microsoft. I think it was Microsoft. Like, you should have disclosed this to Microsoft. So there's a bit of social responsibility in regards to POCs.
Thank you, Adam, for that great segue into. So yeah, I'll get to that. The segue is coming. So, sorry, I forgot the order of the slides. Normally, like what you would expect the sequence of events to be is that somebody discovers something, then reports it to the organization responsibly, as Adam has said. Then that organization is going to acknowledge the fact that this was reported. Then they're going to make an announcement and at the same time, preferably, release a patch. And then maybe after that, you end up releasing your proof of concept, right? Why? Because now everybody has the patch, and it's, you've given enough time for people to apply the patch, and therefore you have this proof of concept. And now it's good. It's good for research, and you've done it sort of responsibly. Okay? Yet, you see this all the time. So these are just a bunch of stories, right? And I'll read some of them to you. A Windows 0 Day disclosed on Twitter, with the POC included, was abused with malware campaigns. POC code published for an unpatched bug in the PHP framework led to an attack on millions of sites. Okay. POC code published for a Cisco flaw for the following routers was released, and not until after that the patch was released. So this happens all the time, especially like when somebody just drops something on Twitter. So why do you think that is? And to kind of help you maybe think about this, I want you to actually put yourselves in the position of a vulnerability researcher, right? And I want you to think, when would you, in that cycle that I've shown you before, release release your POC, right? Would it be between discovering and reporting to the organization? And then what factors would you actually consider in making that decision? Yeah.
Maybe when you report to the organization, they don't really do anything or say like it's not really a problem or you just kind of brush it off in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. So the number one thing is that you've got an uncooperative organization, right? So then what do you do? What's your next plan of action? Anything else? What other factors would you consider? I'll give you a second.
Perhaps they would do it for fame.
Sorry?
Perhaps they would make a proof of concept for internet fame.
Internet fame, yeah, exactly. So then now you've got reputation is on stake here, right? You don't really care about the organization. You just want to be the big shot. Yeah.
What about open source, for example, projects? There's no central company to kind of go to say, hey, you have this bug.
That's actually a great point. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Yeah. I mean, if it's open source code, you can just open an issue and say that there's an exploit. Really, is there a central organization? I mean, I guess you could probably go to the people that are maintaining the code.
It depends probably how mature the open source package is, like the Linux kernel. I can imagine that they have full-time developers doing this. So it depends, but if it's a random project that someone is like, hey, let's go cool, probably it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it also depends on probably, is it well maintained, right? How responsive are the developers? So same thing with an organization, right? What else? There's definitely other factors. What if you discover the bug, you report it to the organization, then they acknowledge it, and then
They don't do anything.
sorry?
They don't do anything.
Yeah. Or they take 6 months before the patch is released, right? Would you release your POC during that time? Maybe to light a fire under their butt, right? So yeah, I mean, there's definitely a ton of factors, and you guys named almost all of them. So let me actually give you the list that I have here, and I'm sure there's more, right? So are they responsive? Are they cooperative, right? Actually, one thing we didn't really talk about was, would you release it before or, if there was a patch available, would you release it before or after? And what incentivizes you, for example, if you're going to release it after, what incentivizes you to do that? Right? If you were just a fame-maximizing human being, you don't really care about the organization, you don't really care about other people, is there anything really making you, are they paying you money for this? No. So what's this thing that companies have nowadays that, exactly, bug bounty programs, right? And it's the unfortunate thing is that a lot of organizations still don't have bug bounty programs. Right? But then what's the problem with bug bounty programs?
They have to be maintained by the company.
They have to be maintained, and what else? There's other stuff as well. Yeah. They have to pay the bounties, yeah, so sometimes, things can get fishy.
Is that a pun?
Sorry? No. Oh my God! Wow. Cool. All right. Yeah. So you have a.
The over-reliance on bug bounties in place of other security controls. Companies thinking if we just have a bug bounty, we don't have to do other security because people are finding our bugs for us.
Yeah, that's a really cool point as well. What about can people make a living wage out of a bug bounty program?
If really good.
if you're really good, right? But does anyone know like any statistics around that? Like I know, yeah.
Yeah, the two big bug bounty providers, like HackerOne and the other one, Bugcrowd, they publish stats on like their top earners.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it? It's somewhere between, it's less than 10%. I think it's like 5% or lower. Make a pretty decent wage at it, and then like it drops off. It drops off on a cliff after that.
Right.
Well, there was like 3 that have ever made $1 million, like 2 or 3 that have actually made $1 million or more doing bug bounties. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think I saw it a little while ago, and it's really, really tough to be like a solid living earning person doing bug bounties. It's really tough.
There for a while.
So we've literally had people doing them in my class, making money in class. So.
Jeez.
Really?
Unreal. Fun stuff. Here, baby. That's it.
Anyone else? Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was gonna say Facebook will pay. I don't remember if it's $20,000 or $30,000 if you block Mark Zuckerberg's account.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg's account is the only one on Facebook that you try to manage locally. It just gives you a message saying this account cannot be blocked. If you block it and you tell them how you did it, they'll send you a check for a lot of money.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know about that.
Because they pride themselves on their security, so some of this stuff is like, bring it, we'll take it.
Yeah, they have like
So, I mean, relating this back to what we're talking about here, which is POCs. If there was a bug bounty program, right, are you more likely or less likely to release your POC after the patch is released and to responsibly disclose the vulnerability?
Well, I guess it depends on what the bug is. Like if you're actually looking for something to like kind of be malicious and for your own gain, then if it's something that can make you a lot of money, then you might not send it in and just use it to make money. But if it's something like harmless that you can't really do anything with, you might just report it and get the money.
Not for a security program. You're not going to use that maliciously, right? I mean, if you're like a pro. You're talking about releasing bug bounties like as just like an industry pro that's that cares about the well-being of other people, or even like in general. If you, like,
just in general.
Yeah, interesting.
I mean, I actually really like that point because I mean, instead of responsibly disclosing to the company, what can you do, right? Who can you? Yeah. Sorry.
You can sell to the high bidder.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think Nick mentioned this today to me, like when we were talking about this, and he was like, yeah, like there's this black market that you can sell that you can sell POCs to instead of responsibly disclosing. Okay, cool. I think that's it. Yeah, like other considerations, is it actually being exploited in the wild? And we've talked about sort of like personal biases. Some people even believe that who cares about like when the patch is released? Like there should be a set timeline, like 15 days, 30 days, 45 days after the discovery of the bug. I get to release it.
Project Zero is 90 days.
Yeah.
So most Project Zero is like 90. That's a reasonable patch cycle.
Does that also count for the time that they have to announce it? Because I know certain people will
They
wait
basically say we reported it to you on day 1. You have 90 days from the day they tell you.
to make a public announcement, right?
No, to like
To patch it.
they're gonna release their details no matter what after 90 days. That's how they work. Unless you can convince them that it's like something internet breaking critical, in which case they'll work with you. But
Yeah, because I think there was somebody was mentioning something about a Scotiabank bridge, and they say that they have 90 days to make it public, and they're putting this as close to the deadline as possible.
that's breach reporting. That's not exploit. Reporting.
We just got that here in Canada not too many years ago.
Yeah, it makes
Last year's
Really? Yeah, it feels like longer.
November.
game over.
Shut up.
Oh, sorry, November 2018, right?
Sorry, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. Do you want to like share with the rest of the room?
There's reporting legislation in Canada that says you have to report a breach of potential like PII or private information within X number of days of discovering the breach. Didn't used to be, you didn't used to have to in Canada. Now you do. Now it's all.
You just got that last year? Like, is that new?
2018.
Well, yeah, pretty much like that's fine. Wow.
That's interesting.
How big? How big does the breach have to be?
It can be anything as long as it's potentially compromise the personally identifiable information of your employees or your customers. Doesn't matter. They can be like 3 people. It could be you accidentally forwarded an email 3 people's details.
There's also a lot that doesn't hit the news too.
Apparently our Office of the Privacy Commissioner, sorry to sidetrack here.
influx of breach reports that they were going to have to deal with. So whatever.
There was actually a story, like, I think I read this like a year ago, where somebody put, so you guys know what GDPR is, right? General Data Protection Regulation. So I think whoever like the spokesperson for GDPR is was emailing reporters, and they put the email addresses of like 30 reporters, something like that, in the CC field and not the BCC field. So GDPR actually, who is responsible for disclosing breaches or for seeing breaches coming in, actually was responsible for a breach. So all the reporters ended up emailing the organization. It was like, are you going to file a breach report? So GDPR actually went and filed a breach report to itself. So then, but they were like 2 hours late on when they had to do it. So then they had to fine themselves. It was like,
stick into the light.
There we go. So anyway, yeah. So let's move on because we have Rick's random Reaper rundown and then another speaker. So yeah, just to sort of recap what we just went through, there's a whole bunch of possible sequences of events, right? You discover the bug, you don't report it to the organization, you drop the POC, and then you just kind of like watch the world burn in the background. You can report it to the organization. There's no acknowledgement or patch, and then you release your POC, and then you discover it, you report to the organization, they acknowledge it, but then they don't release the patch for a very long time. So it can get very complicated, right? It's not just like the last scenario, which is what I showed you at the very beginning, which is just like, yeah, everything's going to go smoothly. They're going to patch it right away. They're going to acknowledge it right away. It doesn't work like that in the real world. And sometimes it's not the researcher being unethical. It's just that the researcher has literally no other option, and they need to, I'm sure there is like a reputational aspect, of course, but there is a lot more considerations that go into that thinking.
I remember there was one case where a researcher got the company acknowledged, and then they said they patched it, and then he tried again, and it was still like able to work with just like a slight change in like the command. And then he told them again, they tried patching it, and then it still was working with a slight change. And then one more time, after like 3 times, he was like, you know what, I'm just gonna release the proof of concept because it's getting nowhere. And it was like a 2-year run.
Wow. At that point, you should just release the patch, to be honest. Yep. So, and finally, just like coming to the big question, right? Which is what we started this with, which do the benefits of actually publishing POCs outweigh the risks, right? So, if you can think of some pros for publishing a POC and some cons, what would they be? Mimikatz?
Yeah, it was one of the vulnerabilities that was, the guy was going to, I think it was Russia? Yeah, it was Russia, where he was going to like a security conference to talk about Mimikatz before he even released the proof of concept. And then what happened was that he got a visit to his hotel with one of like the guys like was about to like try to touch his computer. And he was like, oh, sorry, I got the wrong room, and then left. And then later on that day, he gets visited by 2 KGB, FSB agents that forced him to hand over Mimikatz.
Wow.
So what he did was that he was like scared out of his life. He was like, all right, I have to release Mimikatz so that it's just not used by one person, and so that like everywhere realizes like what potential it has, rather than one agency being able to use this proof of concept.
That's
secret.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Yeah, so you can keep it out of the hands of like rogue governments, for example. Yeah.
Putting it into like your automated testing or automated testing environment, so that it doesn't the bug doesn't reappear again.
Interesting. So you actually are thinking of like taking that proof of concept and then actually putting it into like a scanner of sorts.
Putting it into your build pipeline. So
interesting.
When you release a product, if you do software development right, you should have a bunch of test cases that you run all your changes to and all your commits through. So if you get a POC, not know it, not see like running a POC myself. Hopefully you could put in some kind of automation script.
That's really cool. Yeah, so you can start like securely building code from now on, and that vulnerability will never appear again in your code.
Ideally.
I think if the patch ends, like the patch has been released quick enough, obviously no one would hopefully get affected negatively by it, but also it could help teach other pros about, maybe not that specific exploit because it's been patched, but similar exploits that might be out there, and kind of get them thinking about, different things that they could work on and, help spread the word, I guess.
Yeah, to follow up on that, right? If we don't release a proof of concept, right, you've got this, the black hats who can maybe find this bug and then start using it, but then the world doesn't know about it. So now the white hat and the black hat are not at the same level, right? It's almost like the white hat's always going to be playing catch up. And so we kind of have that imbalance, and it's just something that we can't live with, right? So I guess that's your argument. Anything else?
One of the first botnets, like Parna, was originally, like they were just trying to figure out, how secure is the internet. And then people looked at it and saw, hey, I could use this for something malicious. So that's kind of like the whole good thing becoming bad, I guess aspect.
Interesting.
He just wanted to prove that, hey, there's all this computers on the internet or networks on the internet that are completely unsecure. But then people took his idea and just ran with it.
Yeah, so sometimes we need to release these proof of concepts because we just need to wake people up, right? It's just for public awareness, and so that we can start getting some action on something that is perhaps very dangerous. Yeah, anything else? Maybe cons? Sorry, you want to go at me?
Yeah, one more. Just kind of like the idea that if something exists and no one knows about it, does it really exist?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So kind of like, or does it provide value? So kind of like even if one researcher is able to find it, but no one else knows about it or can replicate it, does it really provide value to society in general? Like other comments I mentioned.
Right. So it's just like when a scientist discovers something, right? They usually release their research so that it can be vetted by other scientists, so that they can verify that work. So this could be something similar.
Public knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah. Cons? Any cons?
More work for devs.
It can be used in malicious ways in the first instance of its out.
Right. So like literally after the patch is released, there's that window where they haven't patched yet and they've just weaponized it, and anyone can use it, right? And I believe actually you kind of see a surge like as soon as the POC is released. Yes, right now.
Yeah, I think they've shown that the time from POC to like automating pen testing of that POC in Metasploit is like an afternoon nap. That's how long it takes to automate it. So people are going to be using it way faster than most organizations will patch it, if the organizations ever do. And a lot of places still just never get around to patching it. So that's the obvious con.
All right, yeah, so I'm going to wrap it up. Just to give you the list here. So, so for pros, it incentivizes us to patch early, to code for security, right? So that's back to what Adam was saying, like build it into your processes. It allows for the open study of vulnerabilities, so there's like no security through obscurity. The black hat and the white hat are on the same level. Public awareness of security vulnerabilities, right, which is important. And then also for like our pen testers, right, who can now take a POC and then weaponize it and then start using it to let organizations know about that bug. And then for cons, we are giving script kiddies sort of an easy way to start mass exploiting things all over the internet, right? There's also something like we didn't talk about this, the dramatization of bugs. So, sometimes when you release a POC and you get like a CVSS score, it might not actually like apply to your organization and your situation. But then because a POC is released, everybody goes crazy, and there's this sort of like herd mentality, and it makes it seem like the bug is actually a lot worse than it is. So that could be a potential con. And then for that company, I mean, it sucks for them, right? Because when the POC is released, it's a PR nightmare, and they have to deal with it, and they can't go through it at their own pace. So yeah, thank you. It was an awesome discussion. Thank you so much for participating. And so maybe we'll do 2 or 3 minutes, or do you want to jump into it?
I might just I'm only going to jump into it.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
really quick,
right.
and then that way we can have a break before our guest speaker. Okay, so repo rundown for this week. I'm not doing like an actual code repo this time. It's actually looking back at some of the repos we've looked at in previous episodes. So typically we would pick a source code repo on GitHub and just talk about how the code works, focus on the neat parts and stuff like that. But one of the things that always happens is why am I doing this? One of the things that always happens is I want to focus on the cool parts of the code, and I usually say right at the beginning, I'm not going to be talking about how this program does logging or does command line argument parsing, because that's boring and who cares, but those 2 things are really important. Correctly parsing command line arguments takes people a long time if they do it by hand, and there's libraries that do this and make it easy. So it's cool to see how some programs have implemented this. Logging is super critical for people in security and just for testing and building your app faster. So I'm going to go back to some of the other repos and look at how they have implemented argument parsing and logging, and we'll see if there's some commonalities or some things that could be improved. So first off, all the repos that I'm going to be looking back at are Python, just because it makes sense to pick one language, and it's pretty much all that I review anyways, because I like Python. Python has the argparse library that basically makes parsing command line arguments pretty simple. It automatically generates usage documentation for you and all kinds of cool stuff. There's a tutorial on the Python documentation website on how to use it, which is great. So I'm going to walk you through a short example. Here's my Python script in the green, okay? Import argparse, argparse.argument parser, so I generate a parser object for myself, and then I just say parse args. Doing no other setup at all. Now I go and I run my program, it doesn't do anything, so I get no output. But if I run it and I say -- help, I already get this nice free help message that the argument parser has generated for me. Okay, that's cool, but let's make our program do something. So I add a couple things. I add an argument. The argument's called echo, and I even print some help text with it. And then later on in the program, I can say print args.echo, because args is what I get when I run argument parser. So now if I run my program with the -h or help switch, you can see it added the echo argument to the help text, which is awesome. I love that I get all that formatting and information for free. And when I actually run the program with an argument, this statement here will just print out what that argument is. That's kind of cool. We'll build on it a bit, make it a little more complicated. I'm adding 3 arguments now. So now I've got one called A, B, and this one, I'd use that kind of convention where I can either provide a single dash in a single letter or 2 dashes in a longer name for the command line argument. For the first 2, I'm also saying, hey, by the way, these have to be of type integer. So that when the program reads it, it knows what kind of variable to put it in. For the third one, we're actually adding an attribute that says action and store equals true. So basically, if somebody provides us the verbose operation, it's just going to create a Boolean variable for us that's set to true. So then I can say parse args again, and now I have args.a and args.b, which were my first and second arguments, and maybe I'm just multiplying them and putting them in answer. And then since the verbose argument was storing true if it's present, I'll do this side of the if statement because I'm saying if args.verbose, it'll do this. Otherwise, it'll do the line below that, which just prints the value. So again, when I run the program with no arguments, it says, hey, you screwed up, I need arguments. If I run it with -h, gives me this, again, nicely formatted help text that I didn't have to write any code to do myself. If I run it just with the first 2 arguments, so A and B, it prints out the product of them. But if I do A and B and then that optional argument, -v, it gives me a longer message. So basically showing how I can define arguments of different data types, true and false, ones that are optional like this one, ones that are required like these ones. It's a really powerful library and can really quickly help you build argument parsers for if you're just writing little command line utilities, which, let's be honest, nobody in this program goes on to be a software engineer. If you're writing code, you're probably writing little utilities for yourself, so why not make them easy and add nice, documented, easy command line switches for yourself with a stupid, easy library? It's amazing. There is an older version of argument parsing in Python that you might see in some projects called getopt. This is for people that are familiar with the way all of the Unix utilities were written, like ls and cat and cd or all those kind of things. The code format for those is a lot different. If you're comfortable with that, you can use getopt. But they say if you've never written in that, just use argparse, because using getopt takes way more code. And actually one of the projects used that, and I'll just show you really quickly how much code it takes to add like a couple of command line switches. Logging. Python has the built-in logging framework that is amazing. Okay, and there's a great tutorial. There's like an intro, an advanced, and a super expert tutorial, all for the logging. I would recommend looking at it sometime. Things to keep in mind. They've even defined 5 levels of error messages for you. Debug is like just general information about your programming, all the way down to critical, meaning something happened and the program's going to crash. So they've predefined severity levels for your log messages for you. Here's a quick example. In my Python script, import logging. And then rather than saying printf, hey, I made it here in my script, or print, I'm now at the top of the loop, don't print, oh God, stop printf debugging. Just say logging.warning, and you can say this is a warning, or logging.info, this is some info. So you can have these different tiers of messages that you leave in the program for yourself. So I go and I run my program, log example1.py, and by default, it only prints warning or worse. So like warning, error, and critical. So it would just print this warning message. Warning from the user root, this is a warning. It's kind of cool. What if I want to get the other log messages though? Well, you can say logging.basicconfig, and what level do I want to set my logging at for my program? I want to say logging.debug, just show me all the messages. Now I run it and I get both of the messages that I created. So this gives you basically one line of code that you can change in your program to see vastly different amounts of output based on your logging messages. That makes debugging and working on stuff way, 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 way faster. Okay. Maybe you don't like printing log messages to the command line though. So let's change the config and add one more argument. We'll say file name equals, and then the name of some log file that you want to write this text to. Now, so I have my level set to debug, everything's writing to example.log, and I'm still just printing the same 2 messages. So I run it, nothing happens, because I'm now no longer saying print to the command line. Now I cat example.log after I run my program, and I get the 2 log messages. Beautiful. However, if you've had me for a class and I've talked to you about logging, you know that I do not like when log messages don't have timestamps. Let's add a timestamp to our log. Still inside the basic config function call, define our log level. Here's the file name. And yeah, this string's a bit ugly. You can just copy and paste this from the internet. But now we're saying add a time and then the log message. And I'm even defining the date format, which is the ISO standard date format that we all like because we can sort it. So now, again, same thing. I run it. I cat the log file. Now I have this extra data here. I've got like a timestamp, and I've got the log message. What I didn't include this time, just because I wanted to keep the string somewhat short so I can fit it on the slide, is the log level and the user and stuff. That got stripped out this time. But you can include all that if you want. So going back to some of the programs that we had in the past, one of the ones we looked at was Conan, which this did some site scraping and stuff for us, I think. I think that's what that one did. I kind of forgot. Anyways, so the main driver file is there, conan.py. And if we look in it, on this left-hand window, they used that old getopt library. Remember how nice and short and concise my arguments were for building the argparse? This is what getopt looks like. You have to check various 2-dimensional arrays for the presence of certain strings and then do splitting on the argument and stuff. That's just to add 4 or 5 command line arguments. It's ugly. It's a lot of stuff. As for logging, the program does not log to any file, just prints everything to the console, either using straight up print statements, or the author wrote this little function for themselves called print warn. That they call throughout the program when they want to print error messages. It still just prints it to the console, but these characters will just make sure anything printed to your bash console is in red. That's their take on logging. I mean, cool, it was probably easy to do, but not super developer friendly. Paste Hunter was a tool that we looked at that scanned pastebin for interesting stuff for us. This one actually just doesn't use command line arguments. It takes a different approach where it reads all of its data from a configuration file. Maybe one day in the future I'll talk about different ways of managing config files and software. But they actually use the logging framework. So here they create they use some of the more advanced techniques, but they create a logger. The logger outputs to the console. They set it to debug. Here's their format with like what log level, the name of the file that it's coming from, and the message. And then they basically start the logging service. One of the other neat things that this author added, and you can go read this later if you want, they also added output to a rotating file handler, meaning they created a physical log file, but every time that log file hits 5 megabytes, it starts a new log file. So you can delete the old one or back up the old one or zip the old one. So all that behavior can be automated by the logging tool for you to basically roll over your log files at regular sort of occurrences. And also it will store up to 7 of them before it starts like overwriting old ones. So you can kind of include all that in your code automatically. Oh my God, that's amazing. Witness Me was another tool we looked at. This one tried to ID web services and provide you detail as part of a pen test recon, but whatever. This one, the author did both of the good things, which is amazing. They used the built-in logging capability. So here's their log file format, along with like logging.info, cool. They also, the cool thing about the Python logger is you can grab the logs from any of the modules and libraries that you're importing as well. So you can have all of the data in one giant log file. So they're grabbing all the logs from all the libraries that they're using and combining it into one massive log file, which is probably easy to manage for a big piece of software. They also defined a bunch of their own arguments. They added some more switches that I didn't talk about, but like here for target, they defined the ability to have multiple targets by saying the number of args has to be 1 or more of this, which is cool. They also defined other arguments where the arguments also have default values if the user doesn't supply any. So like what ports did you want to scan this web service on? Well, they're saying 80, 8080, 443, and 8443, which are standard ports for web traffic. And a default of 25 for the number of threads. So really cool capabilities that you can get, again, basically for free using the built-in logging and parsing tools. One time we looked at these 3 programs, Snare, Clone, and Tanner. This was like a collection of tools that when put together built like a honeypot, basically. So there's all the actual main tools there. Again, these 3, they all use the standard argparse library. Great, nice and short for building arguments. They also added another feature where you can have certain command line switches that are mutually exclusive, meaning I have to use one or the other. Because sometimes just the way like you've kind of phrased the way a utility is going to work, you can't do both. So they show here how they created a mutually exclusive group of arguments and added things to that group of stuff. Again, super powerful command line capability. Also for the logging, they took a slightly different approach. They're using Python's built-in logging service, but they modified it slightly. So they actually created their own logging class and used the built-in logging utilities in that. And then all of these tools import their own logging class that then relies on the Python one, just so that they could have to define all this formatting and stuff in one location, which was really cool. Again, they used the rotating log file, this nice elaborate file format here, or the like log level format. So yeah, I think that's it. Just these utilities are out there. These are different authors taking different approaches on using those built-in utilities. Saving you time, making dev run faster, and getting all of us away from the nightmare that is like printing debug messages to the command line for yourself when there are much better and faster ways to do that. So you should start doing that. Like make yourself a template if you're going to write code, and then just copy your template program every single time, and then you get all this stuff for free. Cool. Anyways, that's it. So let's have a quick break before our guest speaker comes up so I can tear all this down. Thank you. Oh, that was a sound. Oh, I wasn't streaming when I said that. Okay, hi. If you're watching the stream, our guest speaker isn't going to be streaming this evening because I guess some of it's sensitive. So anyways, have a good night. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.